Okay, Assalamu alaikum. Good evening to our Minara Chamber of Commerce members. Welcome to our latest seminar on the processes and regulations of importing of products. Our guest speaker tonight is a director of CUSCON, which is a consulting firm based in South Africa, specializing in customs and the customs and exercise domain. Zain Abu Bakr has 17 years of customs experience, including having held the position of a senior manager at SARS head office and managed the anti-smuggling division since its inception in 2002. Zain was also involved in the development of the customs policies, procedures, and processes. At the end of the presentation, there will also be a question and answer session, which you will be able to ask Zain on issues relating to imports and customs that you have difficulties with. I now hand you over to Zain. Zain?
Assalamu alaikum. Jazakallah, Oscar. Are there any questions or particular topic you'd like to kick off with for the persons who are participating?
I think we've got the presentation already prepared. I think we can discuss like questions and answers after once we go on with the session, we can then talk about it. You can just basically give us the whole, what's happening at imports, customs, the issues around what's going on, like all the problems that we face in the current situation with COVID, with the freight that's overpriced. I mean, the imports, the companies not paying duties, and obviously we can go ahead and we can just discuss and see from there. I think the topic will we'll make up the topic. Right?
Perfect, Oscar. So, Bismillah, let me kick off. Firstly, let's start with what the rights and obligations of the importer or the exporter are. So, the customs regulations requires all persons who are participating in any activity that is regulated by the customs regulations to be licensed or registered with SARS. So you would license or register as an importer, exporter, bonded warehouse, rebate user, etc. SARS has moved on to electronic applications. Previously, you had to do them manually. Part of it has now, you can access it on your e-filing tax profile. So for example, instead of submitting a manual hard copy application in at your local office, you can now go onto your e-filing tax profile and you can license as an importer, which is much simpler and it's much quicker. So the thing is, your tax affairs and your customs affairs are now linked. SARS has one view of the taxpayer on both sides. So moving on, once you have registered a license with SARS, let's take the example of an importer. You can now commence with your importations. So some of the main criteria to take into account when you're importing is firstly the type of goods you are importing, to ensure that you have the correct tariff heading. This is one of the pillars or the priorities. So the tariff heading basically will tell you what your rate of duty is, whether there are any, depending on your country of origin, whether there are any preferential rates of duty, and also importantly, whether there are other requirements by other government departments. So at the port of entry, SARS is the main role player in terms of the movement of goods. They act on behalf of other government departments. There's a number of them. For example, the NRCS, the National Regulator for Compulsory Specifications. So those guys look at the safety of the consumer. So for example, for one example, it's electrical products, your light bulbs, your toasters, anything electrical. You require a certificate from the NRCS. It's called a letter of authority. If you don't have this, your goods are detained. So it's very important to ascertain well in advance the type of goods you're bringing in, the relevant and correct tariff heading, and then from the tariff heading to determine what the requirements are by the other government departments. The one tricky thing, and the timeframes are important, the letters of authority with the NRCS, they have a turnaround time of 120 days. And I met an importer from France, a gentleman I met about, I think it was last week, and he was shocked. He says, but I want to bring in this little thing. It was a battery operated item, electrical item. And he says, it's 120 days for me to get a certificate. So it has a huge impact on your planning and it's important that you take this into account. The NRCS is one example. You also have the South African Reserve Bank. So the amount of money, the cash that you may be taking out of the country, your remittance of funds for payment of the goods is all controlled by the Reserve Bank. SARS also acts on their behalf, customs, they act on behalf of SAPS, the state vet, port health. So what SARS does on the tariff heading, they will put a detention or a stop. So for example, for NRCS, it says LOA required. So the goods are detained pending production of your letter of authority. The NRCS then comes and takes over, they examine the goods, etc. So to avoid unnecessary delays, and obviously the delays cost you in storage fees, you have to ensure that you meet all these regulations and the requirements. So the first part linked to all of that is ascertaining the correct tariff heading. The next pillar when you import goods is to, what is your intention with these goods? You can bring them under a number of different intentions. So one intention is you can pay the duty. So for example, if it tax 5% or it's duty free or 10%, you pay the duty on the goods are yours. You declare it as duty paid. You can either then elect to bring these goods in and put them into a bonded warehouse. So the purpose code for that is called WH, it's put into bond. And previously, in the old days, when I was still at customs, this was a good way for guys to smuggle. They say the goods are going into a bonded warehouse, but they never reach they deliver directly to the respective parties. This still continues. I see recently that there's been 11 containers detained by SARS. I think this was just the other day, and it was clothing declared as footwear. And that's a total misdeclaration. So yeah, what's important is that you then decide what your intention is with the goods, whether you want to send it in transit into another country, whether you want to put it into bond, you may have a rebate store. The one interesting factor is South African government is trying to revitalize the clothing industry. Local manufacturing sector. There's many views on that, and I think a large majority of the views, people are saying, look, it's going to be very hard to revive it. But in any event, an example is where they've created a rebate item, and with this rebate item, you can import the fabric, and obviously this is dependent on a permit that is issued by ITAC. So what SARS has done, they've said to the major retail chain stores, like, for example, Pick n Pay, if I'm a manufacturer and I order from Pick n Pay, I have an order for 100,000 garments. I can then do the calculation of the fabric that I need, and I can apply for a permit. ITAC will look at the order, and they will then give me a permit to import X meters of fabric so that I can manufacture the goods. But the duty rate of 22% on the fabric is rebated, so it's brought in duty free. The whole idea behind this is that if we bring in the fabric duty free, we'll stimulate the local manufacturing, the CMTs, and create more jobs and stimulate that aspect of the manufacturing economy. So yeah, it's not as easy as it seems. You're all aware of the challenges we face, especially with the energy crisis and all the rest of it, especially in KZN. We've been getting a really tough time. Some of these challenges, as Oscar mentioned, has been COVID. I think in China, they're still feeling the brunt of it. They've tried to keep, the zero tolerance policy, but it seems to be taking effect now. So China's in parts of China's in lockdown now. This is affecting. It has a knock-on effect on the supply chain because there are vessels that are now cannot berth and discharge raw material into China, and China's factories then can't produce the goods, and all the orders are getting backlogged. And the zero tolerance policy with China is that they shut the whole area down. The ports are shut down, the warehousing, so nothing moves. And this has recently been, I think in the last month, affected Hong Kong as well. Shenzhen, it's now in Shanghai. So it really has an effect of bringing trade to a stop. At the onset of COVID, after the first year, they found that containers were stuck in one part of the world, namely in America, because they still were ordering goods. And there was a whole lot of containers stuck there, and shipping lines altered their routes, their sailing schedules. And obviously the price of freight went up. I mean, you used to pay $2,000 for roughly for freight from China to South Africa. It's gone up. It went up to close to $14,000 at one stage. I think it's $8,000 now. It's horrific. It hasn't eased as yet. They're talking about maybe in a year's time, but I think also the shipping lines are making a profit out of it. Yeah, it's a difficult. It's not an easy question to answer. But all these challenges and these calculations that affect your costing has to be taken into account. Where you are supplying, for example, a large customer and you have contracts, you have to take that into account as well, that you may not meet the deadlines, and you have to ensure that contractually you are covered. As far as we've dealt with the second pillar, being your intention, we've dealt with tariff. So we move on to the third pillar, which is your valuation. This is a very important aspect of customs. So we all know, or I think a lot of the listeners may know, that in South Africa, we've been faced, again, if I use the clothing sector as an example, we've been faced with what they call cheap Chinese imports. It's a misnomer in a sense, because the guys here have been naughty. They've been importing and undervaluing. In China, there's no cheap Chinese. You can pay for a garment. There's a wide range, and it depends on the quality you want. So you can get the same garment very cheap, or you can get a more expensive, good quality garment. But the importers based in South Africa, there's been a large-scale undervaluation because the rate of duty for clothing is high. It's 45% of the value. There's incentive then to play with the value, reduce your value, and obviously the 45% of the reduced value means you're paying a lower duty rate. And government and the unions have seen this cheap Chinese imports as having negatively affect the local manufacturing sector of clothing as well. So what SARS has done with all these different initiatives taken by government, for example, the rebate item we declared earlier to stimulate local manufacturing, SARS has also started looking at clothing items. So for example, SARS will tell you, or they've been told by the local clothing federation, that, for example, a t-shirt, a plain t-shirt cannot cost you more than, it cannot be less than 80 US cents. So on the SARS risk system, a t-shirt is marked, I'm using this as an example, they have an indicative value of 80 US cents. So if you bring in a t-shirt that's anything below 80 US cents, it's flagged, which means immediately your goods are detained, and then the SARS inquiry starts. So the inquiry is quite intensive. So you have to ensure that you have all your documentation in order, so that you are not faced with huge cost delays, etc. So we've dealt with the valuation aspect of it, and the fourth important aspect is your rules of origin. Obviously, South Africa has a number of trade agreements with various countries. For example, the EU with the US with the AGOA. There's a newly promulgated African free trade, continental free trade agreement, which has yet to be kickstarted. So there's certain countries with whom South Africa has these agreements that enjoy preferential rates of duty. So for example, with China falls under the general rate of duty. They pay the maximum duty. So all goods imported from China will attract the highest rate. But for example, if you import goods from SADC, so for example, you're importing from Madagascar or from Zambia, you enjoy a preferential rate of duty, for example, on the same clothing item being 0%. But SARS has certain conditions. You must prove that the goods originated in that area where that includes that free trade agreement. So if it's SADC, and if we use Mauritius as an example, then you must show a certificate of origin that the goods originated in Mauritius. So a lot of the guys will bypass that. They will bring goods from China, land it in Mauritius, relabel, bring it through, and still get that certificate. But there's only so much SARS can do as well. So it's important to also understand which countries that there are trade agreements and preferential rates of duty, and what are the conditions for you to claim those preferential rates of duty. Because you can bring it in. If you don't have the required certificates, then SARS won't recognize it. Yeah, you will have to pay the full rate. So those are the 4 key elements when you're importing goods. So just to recap, firstly, you need to license and register. Secondly, when you import goods, you need to know what your intention is when you're importing those goods. You need to correctly classify those goods so you understand what your rates of duty are and what permit requirements are by other government departments. You need to ensure that your value is a true and correct value. And you need to also understand that sometimes people buy goods that are at a reduced price, especially now. If I use again the example of clothing, in Bangladesh and Pakistan, there were overruns because with COVID in Europe and in America, a lot of the stores, the malls were shut. They placed orders, but they didn't take their goods. So there was tons of goods that were available and was just sold at reduced prices. But when the guys were importing it into South Africa, SARS had their indicative values, and they said, no, it's automatically stopped. Let's go through this process. The guys' containers were ratcheting up figures like 100,000 Rand at the depot just for storage while SARS went through the inquiry. Obviously, SARS has to follow these steps because it's been mandated. And if somebody starts to shortcut them, then there's a whole issue of, the issues of corruption start, etc. So the officer is bound, and people get frustrated with customs officer, but they are bound by due process. And there's not much room for the commissioner to start making, cutting corners and say, okay, I'm going to give you a treatment that's different from somebody else. So it becomes very painful. So we spoke about the value, and we spoke about the origin and origin certificates that's required. So that is one aspect of it. To touch on the economy currently and what's happening, there's been recent, the smuggling economy is rife in South Africa, I think for a number of years now, and it's increased. And I've recently been also talking to another gentleman who brought goods in, and also clothing is a good example. And he says, I brought these clothes in, I paid my duty. And there's another chap that tells me, but he's paying 50 Rand for the hoodie. I can't even land it at that. That's my cost. So where there are role players, they're importers who are trying to conduct a legitimate business, they are slowly pushed out of the market, or they are pushed or forced to engage in undervaluation because it's the market that dictates to them the laws of supply and demand. So if you bring your hoodie and you pay the duty and VAT and it's landing you at 80 or 90 Rand, and you've got somebody who's evaded the taxes and he's selling the same garment for 50 Rand, nobody's going to buy it from you. And he says, look, I'm going to be forced to do this. These are the realities of trade that we face. SARS is trying. There are initiatives. The risk system is fairly good. There are certain officers that try, but the corruption is also endemic. I think we must be realistic about that, which leaves quite a challenge for the importing community. I think I've said quite a bit. Is there any feedback or any particular aspect, Asghar, that you would like me to continue on?
Thank you for the informative presentation. I mean, really, you've sort of highlighted a lot of issues. I mean, I know with NRCS, at one point, it used to take 7 days to have your LOAs in place. And 120 days today is still mild because sometimes we wait up to 8 to 10 months before we get an LOA. And I think this has just become an issue in the country. I mean, obviously, to do business, especially importing, is becoming difficult. What we need to do is we need to actually find ways of how do we go and combat this. I mean, I also look at, I hear on the issue with the undervaluing. Surely someone has to take responsibility. Customs, SARS, I mean, they've got to sort of do something, because you take a legitimate business that wants to import. He's bringing in stock in on the legitimate way, and then you have the company that brings it in undervaluing and undercutting him. I mean, obviously, that's going to cause a major issue in terms of the economy. What do we do, or how do we go forward in terms of trying to assist the importers in trying to, especially the ones that are trying to do legit or proper business in this country?
Asghar, unfortunately, it lies squarely on the shoulders of SARS. And they have tried. They definitely have tried. With undervaluation, there's been a number of initiatives. So for example, if a person undervalues, he's going to have a problem on his tax side. There's no doubt, because you've got a fictitious value now, a fictitious profit, because you've created a fictitious value on import, you've dropped it. So when you sell your goods, you have to sell it for more than the true value to make a profit. But now your profit from your customs side, your customs declaration becomes huge, it's inflated. And the one way was to get the tax auditors to come in and to look at a person who's been engaged in undervaluation, and it was an easy way to sort of catch them out. However, what I can tell you is the last decade, and I think you'll know what I'm referring to. SARS has lost a lot of good people, the people that were skilled, and I think part of it was an effort to push them out. Because in those years of the state capture, I think the listeners are well versed with what has happened, so that the corrupt activities could continue. So SARS is actually is struggling. They have one hand tied behind the back. They have some good people left, but the scale of the undervaluation is huge. It's not only the undervaluation, it's also just the total misdeclaration. Like I mentioned earlier, the latest was 11 containers. And if you go into the SARS website, it's the first media release. You'll see it on their website, where 11 containers of clothing have been seized and it was declared as footwear. And there were 2 importers involved. There are a lot of clearing agents that are also involved in doing things that are non-compliant. Yeah, they aid and abet. They teach importers how to do the wrong thing, and it's become endemic. So, from the point of view of what can the importing community do, it's a tough one. Yeah, no, there's no easy answer to that, Asghar, I'm afraid.
Okay, and then the NRCS. I mean, like you said, I mean, or the gentleman you spoke to from France or Europe, I mean, obviously 120 days, I mean, you bring in a product that's latest technology or latest product, you've got to take it to NRCS to have it approved. 120 days, you've already got 3 different models or 3 different SKUs that have come in. And by then, you've got to go and apply for those ones. And you know what, it's just an ongoing thing. Obviously, there must be something where we can get together and sort of get NRCS to actually start moving quicker or start jacking the systems up, because I mean it's actually a problem for us.
Exactly. The one option is to form a body like you have with Minara, and to approach SARS, and they're always open to dealing and discussing with people ways of improving. So with the NRCS, part of their systems, they've gone online. So either you can make the application yourself, or you have somebody, you create an account and you give your agent to apply on your behalf. Where it becomes slightly easier is, for example, you need to have your test report. So if you're importing from China, you need to have a test report that shows that those goods are compatible for use in South Africa. It meets all the South African standards and specifications. So to ensure that you ask your supplier for this test report and you hand it over at the time of testing, so there's no delays. What further helps is if there's an EU standard already, there's an EU report where in the EU it's already been accepted. So if you get the EU report, it makes things slightly better. But unfortunately, what one has to do is, if you form a body, is to engage with the NRCS and to say to them, what are the issues you're having? Why is this 120 days there, and how do we reduce that? Unfortunately, my last engagement with them resulted in me lodging a formal complaint, and then the people responded. You know, it's just a lack of people taking things seriously. So it took me complaining to somebody higher up in management of the poor service before the guys came back to me and tried to sort it out. So it's a bit of a uphill battle with them. But I think it always starts with the first step, that where you form a body and you engage with them and look at ways to overcome the challenges that they probably face. So that would be the first step.
See, I think we face another problem with border control and border police at the customs. I think those is what they do is they stop shipments, and obviously they incurring costs for the importers. So we just need to, okay, what I suggest is, I mean, maybe let's open the floor to all the rest of the viewers or members, just to sort of ask Zain their issues and what they require. Amina? Amina?
Asghar, can you repeat?
Amina, okay. Yeah, now I'm back. Okay, so Amina, so what I suggest is, can we open the floor and for questions and answers for Zain, for the rest of the members, just to discuss their issues and obviously what issues or what information they require from Zain.
Yeah, sure, no problem. A guest can unmute themselves or post their questions to the chat box. It's fine.
Okay, so anyone that wants to ask questions, I mean, you're most welcome. I mean, you can just unmute and have a discussion with Zain. Please, I mean, the floor is open.
Oscar, just to add in while we wait, just to add into the issue of the border police. Yeah, unfortunately, it's a nasty habit that started of corruption as well. Where in fact, I sat with the one depot manager, and he says, you know, so the SAPs came in, they sat with them and said to them, look, you know, we can send the containers to your depot, but you're obviously gonna, you know, make something. So if we send it to your depot, we get a kickback. And this is the reality of trade.
That's it. Yes. No, I know. We've been facing that. We've been seeing that. It's become very common at the moment with this year.
Yes, and a lot of importers, they pay the $5 grand. I mean, and the agents are there because it's the agents that facilitate that. So the agent tell the guy, you know, I can get it released. I remember the last one was $8 grand. So somebody's pocketing $3 grand, giving them $5 grand. But it creates a monster in them that once they get the taste for this, then it's very hard to stop them. So they continue to stop. The only way is to refuse, is to say, my goods are fine. There's nothing wrong with it. You want to stop it. So the first time you're going to have the pain, they're going to take it, they're going to examine it. The second time they do that, you're going to lodge a complaint. And this is what we've done. The third time we went up to one of the higher up, I forget the person's name within the ranks there, but he was higher than a captain. I will get his name and I'll send it through to you. And we had a meeting with him at Maiden Wharf. And we said to him, you know, this is not how you do risk profiling. These guys are stopping the same container over and over and over again with the same result. And that helped a lot. So they start identifying that, hey, you know, these guys are not going to play ball. In fact, they're going to cause problems to us. So let's just leave them alone. And that's one way of dealing with them.
Okay. Is there anyone that like to ask Zain a question?
Shamima, Yusuf, you have a question? No.
Okay, so can we go forward? Zain, if there's no questions, and if you'd like to ask any other questions, maybe you can put it on the chat box, or maybe contact Amina on 031-208-1898, and maybe just have a chat to her, ask her the questions, and then she can then forward it over to, Zain, and then we can come back to you from the Minara Chamber of Commerce. All right. Amina, so are we okay with that?
Yeah, that's fine, no problem. I'll share the details in the chat box now.
Perfect. Zain, thank you so much for taking your time and affording the Minara Chamber of Commerce members insight to importing procedures. And I'm sure that we've all learned a lot this evening. And thank you to our audience for listening to our presentation. Hope this was something that has opened your eyes and you've learned something from here. Anyway, no, thank you so much. Right. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.